everybody. It's Helen Hillix, licensed therapist and intuitive counselor, and I'm here today as the host for Sacred Sexuality Revealed, Secrets to Deeper Intimacy, Passionate Connections, and Longer Lasting Desire. And I have the wonderful and brilliant Ken Page with me today, who is a really great author. His words are just flow off the page, and I can't wait to quote some of them for you. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him later. But right now I want to say why I'm doing this summit, which is twofold. I had a painful sexual history myself as a young woman back in the sexual revolution. So-called sexual revolution, and it led me to be promiscuous, had abortions, do all kinds of things that didn't really feel authentically me after the fact. And it left me with a lot of shame about sexuality. It wasn't until many years later that I discovered sacred sexuality that really resonated with who I am. And I don't want you to have to wait that long to discover that. And I also became a therapist 35 years ago, and I've had countless clients who have had issues about shame and how to have a deeper intimacy and wanting sacred sexuality and not knowing how. So that's what motivated me to do this summit. And I really am excited for you to meet Ken Page. I'm going to read a bio of him right now. Ken Page, licensed clinical social worker, is a renowned psychotherapist and a leading voice of hope and wisdom for everyone seeking to find and cultivate healthy, lasting love. He's the host of the Deeper Dating podcast, author of the best-selling book, Deeper Dating, How to Drop the Games of Seduction and Discover the Power of Intimacy, which I love that title, and the creator of the Deeper Dating course. He's been featured in O, the Oprah magazine, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Cosmopolitan, The Advocate, and more. Ken is passionate about helping people understand the search for love as one of the greatest spiritual adventures in life, and he celebrates the inclusion of the LGBTQ community into the banquet of wiser relationship advice. Ken lives in Long Beach, New York, with his husband and children and their pets. Welcome, Ken. I'm so happy to have you on the show. I really am. I love your passion. I love your clarity about what's important in life, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about sacred sexuality.
Thank you. And I have so much I'm going to want to say. And I just also want to thank you for doing the work that you do, because it's so important. It's such a wonderful mission. And sexuality is such a misunderstood and understood dimension of our lives. And also you welcoming the LGBTQ community as well is a wonderful thing. So I'm just thrilled to be a part of this, because all of us have so much healing we need to do around our sexuality.
Amen, brother. I mean, that is so true. That's another reason, we have so much healing to do around our sexuality. Well, let's dive in and talk about how do you think of sacred sexuality, and then we can talk about some of the reasons why we need so much healing.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to use an image to talk about sacred sexuality. And it's an image that I use for the entire intimacy journey, as well as the search for love. And it's really simple. It's just a target. It's the image of a target. And if you picture this target has concentric rings, and the closer you get to the center, the closer you're getting to your truest self, to the beating heart of your humanity, your tenderness, your inspiration, your vulnerability, your passion, your longing, the most you parts of you that there are. And the further away you get from that, the more you become a kind of airbrushed, defended version of yourself. So the journey is to move closer to the center.
I love that.
The further you move out from the center, the colder and emptier the world becomes, and the less connected you are. But it's not so easy, because the closer we get in toward the center, the more passion we feel, the more inspiration, the more hurt, the more bigness, the more creativity, the more we get in touch with our unique genius. And genius is not an easy thing to have because our genius language is unique. No one has the genius language, the mission language, the heart language that we have. So it's a brave act. And we're all herd animals. So we don't want to be that different. But when we do, and when we find words and ways to be the person who we authentically are, we become more magnetic. We have a deeper sense of meaning. As we move closer to that center, we feel our sadness and our hurt and our vulnerability. So we become more compassionate people. And to me, sacred sexuality is a sexuality where we live more and more closely to that center of our being, from our authenticity, from the beating heart of our humanity. To me, sacred sexuality holds three components, and each of these are so deeply important. I mean, and these three can, of course, be divided out into many more, but they are this. The first is a feeling of safety, and that's essential. You can't have sacred sexuality if there's not a sense of real safety. I mean, and God knows people have sex that feels transcendent and wild and amazing, and it's not safe. They're highly intoxicated. They're in an unhealthy relationship. They're having unsafe sex, but the sex is crazy hot. But it's not really safe. That's not sacred sexuality when you're hurting yourself. So that's one thing, is safety. And I mean deep sense of safety. We'll talk more about that, how to get to each of these. That's one. The other is sex where you are deeply moved, where you're coming from that core place, like this concept that intimacy means into me see. Sex is where you look at your partner, they look at you, and you feel like they're seeing into you. You feel like you're seeing into them, and you're seeing into yourself as well. So, and when we have this kind of sex, we can be deeply, deeply moved. It could be the kind of thing where we're moved to tears, or we feel a sense of love or enthusiasm that's so big, that it's so big and so rich. And often in sex, we get hit by surprise. We get walloped by how moved we can be when we have this kind of sacred sex. Sometimes we freeze up because it's so deep and so moving that our being doesn't know how to handle it. And I'll talk about that more later, because that's a natural experience that we need to make room for in sex. So that's an important one to talk about later. So the first is safety. The second is a sexuality that moves us, that is heart-based, that is soul-based. The third is about turn-on. And this comes best when the first two are your foundation. The sense of safety, the sense of being touched and moved and connected. Then when those things are there, you can think about what really turns you on. And that's a kind of coming out too, because for all of us, I often think like it would be the greatest thing to go around with a video camera all around the world and ask people, if they fantasizing that they would answer truly, honestly, what really turns them on. And first of all, it's hard to admit that to ourselves often, because maybe what turns us on feels so simple and so vanilla and white bread that we feel like, oh, well, that's like really boring. Or maybe it's really kinky and really wild. Or maybe it's just different and unique. But that act of thinking, what really turns me on? What ways of touching? What ways of being touched? What kind of pacing? What actions? What roles? What play? What all of those different things really turns me on. And when we put those together, a deep sense of safety, a deep sense of a heart connection, and a deep sense of turn on, well, that's sacred. That's just absolutely sacred. And that is sex that is at the heart and soul of that center of the target. And when we do that, that mixture of love and turn on and play and generosity is just It's soul food. It's just soul food. And it's so bonding in a relationship. It's more bonding than we even realize. Like we could think, oh, I've been with my partner forever and we have nice sex. We don't have it that often. We haven't had it in a while. And then you have sex and it's connected sex and you say, oh my God, why did we wait so long?
That
Look what
happens
this
to me.
does for us.
Absolutely. It's like, oh my God, why aren't we doing this every day?
Yes, yes. So that's my thought about sacred sexuality.
I love that, Ken. And, you mentioned the part about being moved, that it really touches your heart and soul.
Yes.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about the soul aspect of that and how, because people get confused, I think, in the use of the word sacred, that they think it has to be something like religious or whatever. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about your interpretation of that soul connection and what it means. Is it the oneness? Are you feeling the connection to the oneness?
That's a great question. And I'm actually going to ask that question of all of your viewers right now. Here's a moment that we could share. I could think of moments for me that are sacred. When I look in my husband's face and I see this bursting kind of love, and goodness and tenderness and like acceptance, that's sacred to me. Holding my child when he was little, that's sacred to me. Honesty in a relationship, that's sacred. And I guess it's a sense where something so deeply personal and individual has a kind of grandeur to it, kind of vastness, a kind of sense of universality of something so much bigger and deeper, that it touches the hem of something that really has a grandeur and a greatness. To me, that's my definition of what feels sacred. And now I want to ask everyone to take a minute and think, what's your personal definition? Because that's all that really matters. Like, what are some moments in your life that in retrospect you think, that was sacred? And just take a minute. Everybody could take a minute to think about that. And sometimes they're the oddest moments. You wouldn't necessarily think of them as sacred. And sometimes they feel religious and sometimes they don't feel religious. But that definition of sacred, what I would say is that the closer you get to the beating heart of your humanity, and the closer you get to a connection to the humanity of the world and your connectedness with the world, to me, that's sacred, that's vast. And that those moments that we have are more than just good moments. They're portals. They're portals to our very soul, to the source of our being and to our mission in life.
Wow. I completely agree. And I can think of so many moments, whether it's out in nature or it's during the sacred ritual that my husband and I do before we have sex. And I remember one instance specifically of staring into his eyes and he into mine and feeling that we could see God, whatever that means, the oneness in each other's eyes. And I love the encouragement for the audience to take a moment and pause this interview and take a moment and really contemplate what is sacredness to you, because it is so much the center of what we're talking about.
The center, yes.
Just like you're saying about the target.
Can I ask you what that ritual is that you and your husband do?
Absolutely. I learned it from my spiritual teacher, Beth Green, but it's connecting. We send chi from the universe, and chi is, just life force energy. We connect to the oneness, and then we send chi through our third eye, my third eye to his third eye, and then my heart to his heart, and then my genitals to his genitals, and then back, sending it all back to the oneness to be recycled and blessed, if you want to call it that. And then we connect and ask whether it's for the highest good to have sacred union, is how we call intercourse. We may have sacred union. We may end up just spooning, whatever it is. But it it changed my life when we started doing this sacred ritual.
Oh my God, that's gorgeous. Thank you for telling me that. Love that. Love
And
that.
I'll send it to you. I have a video and a tool typed up about it. It's a very powerful thing, and you can make up your own ritual. You and your husband may do something completely different, but for us, the sending of the chi from the universe to me just reminds me that he's sacred, I'm sacred, this thing we're doing together is sacred, life is sacred. It's a powerful shift for me.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It sounds great.
Yeah.
My husband and I just started working with a wonderful Tantra coach, Grant Shepard. And so we now are, and it makes such a difference. We just sit and like in this very sweet, connected position that we found, and we meditate together, and then we share breathing. And then we have sex after that place. And it's when we first did it, I actually found that it scared me. I found myself being frightened. And I'm going to talk more about that, because I think that our relationships to our fear are that refining our relationship to our fears is one of the most glorious gifts we can give to ourselves. I have a lot more to say about that. And I think that's why we struggle so much with sex, is there's not enough room for our fear. I'll talk more about that. But anyway, I felt that. And then it kind of moved into, getting past that and a much deeper sense of connection. So, yeah, it's a wonderful thing to have a process like that with your loved one.
I completely agree. And, I want to segue into, I want to talk just for a second about the title of your book, which I know you'll talk later about too, is Deeper Dating, How to Drop the Games of Seduction and Discover the Power of Intimacy. We are absolutely not taught to have sacred sexuality. We are taught to look good and to, seduce one another. And it's just all so crazy. I wanted you to talk about the 4 stages of dating, because I feel like it segues, you got to date first and then find, quote unquote, the right partner who wants to do this dance of intimacy with you. And most people, they just don't know how to do that, because we're not taught how to do that. So I feel like we're kind of diving, out of the ecstatic realm of soul connection and into dating, but we get to bring it down to day-to-day practices too, or people won't know what to do.
Absolutely, absolutely, so true. And the way you date, to a large degree, determines the person you find. And the person you find, to a large degree, determines whether you can have sacred sexuality with them. My dear friend, Hara Morano, who's the advice columnist for Psychology Today, says it great. I interviewed her on my podcast. She says it great. She said, there are 3 things that you need to consider if you're looking for a relationship. The first is character. The second is character. And the third is character. And I think that's great. I think it's so true. And, of course you need to be physically attracted to someone. That's a given, but that kind of takes care of itself. And that's the question that I teach people in my book and in my online course, the Deeper Dating course, and in my podcast, to think of, does my soul feel safe with this person? And when that becomes your question in your dating life, trust me, your choices will be so much better. And you will also be doing 2 other things. You will be shifting your sexual and romantic attractions, because we can change those over time. The third thing you will be doing is healing your attachment style, because a wounded attachment style comes from a connection between you and your deepest self that is compromised, not solid, not safe. So when your first question, when you do these stages, and I'll talk about those stages in a minute, but this one of it, does my soul feel safe, kind of encapsulates it all. When you do that, your deepest inner self feels, oh my God, I'm going to be taken care of. And that's the feeling that's going to progress in a healthy relationship. And
Right.
that's the feeling that is going to allow sexuality to be sacred.
I want to read a little tiny quote out of that blog of the 4 stages of dating. And when we were talking prior and I was going over that quote with you, it made me cry. I may not, I hope I don't cry this time, just
That
whether I do or not, but
means a lot to me.
that's how touched I was by this. And
Mm.
this is the quote: there are 4 stages that comprise the path to healthy romantic love. And those same stages mark the path to a life that's rich with intimacy in all its forms. Because in the end, the true skills of dating are simply the skills of intimacy. And the skills of intimacy are the most important skills in our lives.
Yeah,
Makes me cry again.
me too.
Because it's why we're here. It's why we're
Mm.
here, is to connect to one another and
Yeah,
to really learn how to have that sacred connection. And yet our culture, whatever, just completely undermines that. But we're going to get to that in a moment about why we don't know how to have intimacy. But let's go back now with that stage set, that these skills are the most important skills you'll ever have in life.
yeah, yeah. So the first stage, and this is really a big one in my intensives, in my book, and in my course, I spend a lot of time on this because it's the absolute center. And it is the discovery of what I call our core gifts. And what does that mean? That means the parts of us that are in the center of that target. And the way we discover our core gifts is by looking and seeing in our day-to-day life what moves our heart the most, what inspires us the most, and what hurts us the most. And this is a process that in my courses and my intensives takes a third of like the entire course, or a quarter of it, but really actually more like a third, because we're not taught to see that every one of our deepest insecurities reveals our greatest gifts. That the places where we've been embarrassed because of our tenderness, our sensitivity, our softness, our ferocity, our love of truth, our passion, those places that we've thought, oh, I have to calm that down or I have to change that,
Mm-hmm.
those, the actual cherishing, this is a formula that is like huge. This is the formula. The degree to which we push those parts of ourselves down is the degree to which we're going to be sexually and romantically attracted to people who are bad for us. And the degree to which we don't just accept those parts of ourselves, but cherish them and treasure them and understand that they're our deepest mission and really honor those parts of ourselves. To the degree that we do this, we are actually going to find ourselves sexually and romantically attracted to people who are so good for us, with whom our soul does feel safe. So that's the first part of the journey. We do lots of exercises and processes to help people claim these core gifts, which often feel counterintuitive because we've pushed those parts of ourselves down.
Right.
Um,
That is so fascinating. I just want to pause for a moment and honor that, because we are taught to, suppress all those things that seem to make other people uncomfortable, or,
yes,
or make us feel vulnerable.
yes,
And we are taught to suppress those, and they are our core gifts. I mean, I just think back myself about, oh, you're so sensitive, or you're so intense, and it's like those things, I didn't do a very good job of suppressing them, but I've tried because
yes. And we always like they fight to come out, but when they're in an inner environment where they're not cherished, they'll come out in ways that are not always, the best. So, and everyone who's watching this can discover your core gift, well, certainly through the processes that I teach. But the simplest one is just this. Every time you tell yourself you're being too sensitive, reframe that and say, what's the core gift here? Every time you're telling yourself, I'm not being tough enough, I'm not being strong enough, reframe that. Ask what your core gift is. Every time you feel like you're being too fierce, too alive, too original, reframe it. Ask what your core gifts are, because those qualities are the qualities that will change, transform, and save your life. And when you embrace them, you'll find people that also embrace them. So that's that first stage, and it's hugely important. And it's, one of the greatest lessons of life. The second stage
Can I
is,
ask you a question? I'm sorry.
oh, sure.
This burning desire. What if you're in a relationship and you notice that there are things about the other person that are irritating you? Can you do the same thing with that? With saying, I wonder how this relates to their core gifts, instead of me getting triggered trying to support that concept in the couple.
Absolutely. And that's just, self-love doesn't happen by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps or just affirming. It happens when we look into the eyes of someone we love, and one of the parts of ourselves that we don't know how to love yet, we see them loving it. That's how we learn self-love. So by doing just what you described, you give that gift to your partner. And there's a formula here that I also speak about in the book. And the formula is this: whenever there's a defensive behavior, like where you're getting prickly or difficult or immature or whatever, that is covering a wound. Underneath every defense lies a wound. Under every wound lies a gift, a vulnerable, tender part of ourselves that has been hurt and that has needs that it can't be articulated. Under every wound is a gift, and every gift is the source of our self. Every gift leads to the core of our being. So your partner's being annoying, you think to yourself, okay, I know them really well. What's the hurt that made them become this way, that they've had to live with their whole life? What is that hurt of their life? And then, what's the gift underneath that was wounded in this world, that felt like it didn't have a home in this world, that made this difficult for them? What's the gift? When you see that, you'll see your partner in a really different light. Because we are the most immature and defensive around our greatest wounds. And our greatest wounds surround our deepest gifts. So that's a formula. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing you brought up. So thank you for that.
And we show those most commonly with our partners.
Absolutely, absolutely. With our partners, if we don't have languages that help express and apologize for and make room for our immaturities, our excesses, our controlling, our fear, then our relationship won't be as much fun.
I love that. I cannot believe the time is flying by. We've only got 16 more minutes, and we've got so much more to talk about. Okay, so we may not make it through all of our questions, Ken, but
no, we may not. But let me then thank you for that reminder of reality around time. Let me just briefly explain the other three stages, because it was the first that I wanted to talk about the most. The second is this: what does modern culture teach us about how to find a partner? Make yourself more attractive. And it focuses on that like relentlessly, as if most dating advice was developed by like a team of anxious adolescents. And really the deeper journey is the journey of understanding your attractions and being able, we can't force our sexual attractions, but we actually can educate them. So that's the second stage, is deep, rich work around that. The third stage is, and I'll say one thing about that. We all have two basic circuitries of attraction. One is what I call attractions of deprivation. And that's where the turn on and the desire comes because the person just doesn't love you fully. They just don't honor you fully. And you feel like, I've almost got them to do it. What do I have to do to get them to do it? And it feels like the most intense love. But ultimately, it's a deprivational kind of thing. Mm-hmm. The other one is attractions of inspiration. And that's when you're attracted to somebody because of their goodness, their availability, and their consistency. And it's a whole different circuitry which needs to be developed. So that's all part of stage 2. Stage 3 is you're looking for love. Where do you go? How do you get out there? How do you lead with your core gifts? How do you reveal who you really are in early dating, in early sex, in early connecting? And the 4th stage is when you do meet someone wonderful, all the rewiring that has to happen to be healthy in a healthy relationship. So those are the 4 stages we teach. And I'm sorry I gave short shrift to those last 3.
Well, people will have to just buy your book and go to your
Yeah.
website. I mean, there's a lot.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
So
Yes.
I want to dive into why don't we know how to be intimate?
I'm so glad you bring this up. Yeah. And there's so much to say here about this. I'm going to first talk about sex and intimacy. Where are we taught about the reality of sex and intimacy? I remember seeing a European movie. I don't remember the name of it. I was much younger. But this one woman said to her boyfriend, she said, the reason I really love you is because you're the same person. It's very moving to me because I think it's really deep. You're the same person before sex, during sex, and after sex. It's always you. You don't go into this robotic kind of performance mode. You're just you. And I love that line. I thought that was just, amazing. And we're not taught to be just us. We're taught to be performance machines.
Yes.
And we're taught to objectify ourselves. And God knows it is great to be wild in sex when you want to be wild and to really go for it. But that's different than feeling like you have to be on and this performance machine the whole time. That's just not how it works. So that's one thing. We learn about sex from porn. We learn from sex from culture, which teaches us that it's this like constantly white hot thing. It doesn't teach us that sexual energy ebbs and flows. We need to be okay with both of those parts. And that when our sexual energy is not white hot, there are beautiful, exquisite things that you can do to drink of the beauty in those places where the sexual energy is more gentle, more quiet. For example, the other piece, so that's one thing, is we're not trained. We are just not trained, which is why what you're doing is such a liberating gift to the world. And I thank you for it. Why I was so excited to be on your summit and your podcast. The other piece is this, and this is just one aspect, but I think it's a really important one. And that is this, that in sex, we have walls and we have fears. And instead of thinking of those walls and fears as something that we have to eradicate or transcend, I think we should actually see them as part of the meat and potatoes of sex. Sorry, vegetarians, you know what I'm talking about, though. The tofu and whatever. So we're not taught to understand, like you're with your partner, and all of a sudden you feel frightened. Well, you're not supposed to feel frightened. You're supposed to keep going. And especially if they're feeling really intense and into the moment, you're not supposed to be pulling back. Men, what if you lose your erection? Women, what if you go into a zone where you just want to hold each other? Same for men too. What if your sexual expression pulls back? And it's supposed to pull back. There are supposed to be ebbs and flows even during sex. We're not taught this, so we don't know what the hell to do. So what do? We think, well, I got to satisfy my partner, so I have to move into performance mode. And at that moment, we have lost ourselves, and our partner will know it. It's better to stop and say, honey, could we just hold each other? Or even, I'm feeling frightened. Or we just stop and think, what do I want sexually right now? And it might be totally different than what we think we're supposed to do. Or when we have fears in sex, that there's room to talk about that. And again and again and again, that we recalibrate during sex, before sex, and after sex, and say, what is it I'm really needing? And what it is you're really needing might cognitively feel like sexual failure to you, but it's not. And when you ride with it and make room, you will find a wave of such a deeper sexual connectedness that it's just amazing. So I think that's one really big reason that that we don't know how to connect sexually and
I love
intimately.
that. I remember distinctly when I discovered sacred sexuality and felt permission to stop and just say, I'm not feeling connected. Can we take, whatever it is, whatever the need to stop.
Isn't that the bravest thing to do that?
But it's so liberating. You're so right about the, interfering or interrupting is the word, interrupting that performance. And I can't tell you how many, I'm sure you've had this experience with clients, when I say just stop, and cuddle or talk or whatever, but he didn't come yet, or she didn't, get to, and it's like people don't know the simplest tool for intimacy of just, like you're saying, be authentic, connect to yourself. What you're feeling is going to lead to more intimacy, not less.
It will, because in those moments when your wave is pulling back, it's getting ready and hoping for a wave that's going to move forward. But it won't unless that pullback part and the interiorization it's requesting of you, or the connection that it's requesting of you, unless you allow that to happen. And I think another reason is around gender roles. That's a really, really big one. And, it really bothers me when I hear teachers talk about women. You have to remain feminine or you'll scare off your alpha guy. That's just such a load of crap. The minute gender role expectation trumps authenticity, you're screwed. And the connection is screwed. And, I know that for men, having to be the one who performs, the one who satisfies, the one who doesn't necessarily receive as much. These are very, very limiting. And then for men, certain parts of your body are not supposed to be touched or played with. Your nipples, your anus. These are heterosexual men that might have this experience. And then the entire kind of world of what gay men, what gay women, what bisexual and men and women experience too. The expectations of gender roles still are very tyrannical in the LGBTQ culture in many ways. And for people whose gender identities are more fluid or non-traditional, there's a whole learning there too. So again, what it comes down to is embracing authenticity, but gender role stereotypes cripple us all.
I love that. And I love the inclusion of the LGBTQ community with the hetero community, because I don't know, I have a belief that if we had no cultural training, we would all be somewhere fluid on that spectrum. We might land primarily in the hetero or the homo or the bi or whatever, but we would all be much more fluid if we didn't have those cultural mandates that no, you're either this or you're that.
Yes, absolutely. I call those the electrified tripwires of gender taboo. Don't cross over there. You'll get electrocuted. You will be in such big trouble. And we all wrestle with that. So, the cherished gift of sacred sexuality is whoever you are, you're with a partner, and you ask yourself, what is unfolding in me? How can I express that? What's unfolding in my partner? How can I connect with that? And there's a grace in doing that takes us out of so much cognitive limitation. But I want to say, all of us have been sexually traumatized in this culture. All of us. Not some of us, all of us. And there needs to be room for us to honor the reverberations of trauma by making space for it.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm totally with you, but I'm not sure our audience will be following that all of us have been sexually traumatized.
Yeah. So I'll give some examples of that. a man who is having sex and his erection gets soft. And there's this terrible feeling of, I'm failing. That's deep sexual trauma that men are taught. This is just one small point, but it's a really interesting thing that I've seen in my work as a psychotherapist, is that often the sign of losing your erection, like when you meet someone and you're deeply attracted to them and you're really excited by them and the relationship is new, you find that this might not be an issue at all. But all of a sudden, when your feelings get really deep and you're kind of stunned by how deeply you're feeling connected, you might lose your erection at that time. And you'll think, well, what's wrong? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my attraction to this person? What's wrong with this person that I'm not attracted anymore? Mm-hmm. No, it's that you're touching such a deep place. So that's just one tiny example. So many women, and really so many men too, have been sexualized by others, have been sexually abused, have been emotionally sexually abused. That creates trauma. And trauma, what abuse does is it surgically bonds the most precious parts of you to pain and shame. And that's not an easy thing. And so in those moments, we need to be able to find ways to make space for that. Gender roles are traumatizing for people when they don't fit in with who we are. And they're traumatizing for all of us. The fear of breaking gender roles. These are just some examples of some of the sexual trauma that we have.
Now we have 2 minutes left, and I know you said you needed to stop right on the hour. So I want to encourage people to, just as they did taking the time to identify what is sacred, to take the time after this interview and really think about what are those painful moments that have happened to you regarding sexuality. And I love that you broadened the definition. It doesn't mean you were sexually molested as a child. It means that something painful has happened to you regarding sex, and that is everybody.
That's everybody, right? Even if it's expectations that are painful, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I really want to encourage people, because if you honor that about yourself, you're going to be a lot more gentle with yourself and compassionate with your partner, and that will lead to more intimacy.
Yeah, and just to say something else about that briefly is, don't feel like you need to do that alone. You might need to work with a therapist. You might want to work with a therapist. You might, there are technologies like EMDR, like brain spotting, like tapping, which are clinically proven to, dramatically reduce PTSD trauma symptoms. And so if don't feel like you have to do this yourself as well, especially if there's deep trauma.
Yeah. I could talk to you the entire day, Ken.
Vice versa. Thank you so much.
Please tell the audience how, first about your free gift, which I'm so excited about, and then how to stay in touch with you.
Sure, I'd love to. So the free gift is the first 2 chapters of my book, Deeper Dating. But those are not simple chapters. They actually include the whole section of the exercises that will teach you how to discover your core gifts. So, within these first 2 chapters, you will learn these techniques, many of the key techniques for discovering your core gifts. So it's a beautiful way to get introduced to this wisdom path to finding love. And it's for everyone, even if you're in a relationship. Those chapters and these ways to learn to discover your core gifts are for absolutely everyone.
I'm glad you said that, because people get so hung up on, I'm already in a relationship.
Yeah.
Why would I talk about sacred sexuality? I'm not in a relationship, but it's all about intimacy, and it's for
That's
everyone.
right. That's absolutely right. Thank you. Yeah, that's really true. And for people that just want to learn more about this work, I would say the best thing to do is go to deeperdatingpodcast.com. And there you will see all of my podcasts where I teach, and I do some interviews. I haven't done interviews in a while, but I teach about all of these different aspects in great, great detail. And the podcast has gotten really great response, and we're just up to just almost at 250,000 downloads since we started. So that's really exciting. My book, Deeper Dating, is available everywhere. And now if you go to Deeper Dating Podcast, you can get an online course where I personally, through audio and some video, guide you, and a workbook through every step of this journey. So I'm super excited about that. And that just came out as well. And all of that could be found on deeperdatingpodcast.com.
deeperdatingpodcast.com. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ken, for taking time today out of your busy schedule to connect with me. I feel
what a joy.
I just feel the intimacy, and it's one of the greatest pleasures of doing summits is the wonderful, wonderful people that I get to meet. And you are one of my favorites, I have to say.
Oh, thank you so much. It was just an honor to get to work with you. I have such a sense of connection with you. And
yeah, I really want to stay connected with you. It was just lovely. And I know the audience is going to get profound breakthroughs just from listening to this and then connecting to your work more. So thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you, Helen. It was a joy.